Lieutenant Colonel Lincoln S. Farish here, with my trusty PIPOC. Whether you're talking civilian engagement, civilian encounter, key leader engagement, talking with the three, negotiation, a discussion, you're going to spend a lot of your time in civil affairs talking with other people and have a few ideas on how to make it a little bit easier and more successful for you. As always, these are my thoughts, not the U.S. Army's, not U.S. KPOC's, Lincoln S. Farish's thoughts. Let's get started, shall we? This ended up being significantly longer than I thought it would be, so I will split it in two, and we'll get into the TTPs of KLEs and CEs at another time. But for the moment, let's get down to the basics and understand how to best utilize your resources so that discussions, arguments, debates, and negotiations go the way you want them to. I'm going to start off with a few definitions here on discussions and arguments, negotiations, and debates. Obviously, lots of different people have different ways to break down these topics. These are the ones that I chose, or this is how I chose to define them because it made the most sense to me, especially in relations to civil affairs work. So a discussion is a calm, unemotional information sharing. It's just a report, a recitation of facts. You're sharing information back and forth. No one's personally invested. You may make a decision from it, but mostly it's just a back and forth. An argument, however, is a bit different. All right, this is when emotion gets involved, ego gets involved, and an attempt to persuade, a desired end goal is involved. A discussion may have an end goal we're going to decide on based on these facts, but an argument is an attempt to persuade, an attempt to dominate the outcome by one person or group of people on another. The problem with an argument, besides the fact that ego gets involved and the outcome matters, is that they can then further devolve down into actual violence, physical violence, or relational aggression, which is used to reduce social status, remove allies, and isolation. So you've got to be very, very careful when you're out and about to avoid getting into arguments because the outcome matters, and it matters to both sides. And try and keep them in the realm of discussion. Now, discussions tend to be more effective than arguments, but that's not to say that arguments are ineffective. They're just more dangerous. A debate is essentially ritualized combat using words, all right? It's got a ritualized format with rules and everything else. Think of it like boxing with words, all right? And one counters your opponent's assertions, usually devoid of emotion. You may use emotional appeals or logical fallacies, but you try to avoid that because if it's spotted, it weakens the argument. And it's a competitive endeavor. We don't usually follow that, but if you know how debates work and how people win debates, you can then use that for the next category, which is a negotiation. Now, a negotiation is a debate, but it's not trying to win. It's trying to find a settlement that both sides can agree. And negotiation skills are really important for conflict resolution, consensus building, and for your everyday encounters that you will have as a CA officer. Like a lot of things in civil affairs, something easy to write or easy to say, tough to do in reality. When you want to talk to someone, to sell them something, to interact with them, the first thing you have to do is get their permission. Then you have to get their attention. And what I mean by that is where they focus on you and what you are doing. So whether it's a discussion, debate, argument, or negotiation, you got to get their permission. And to get their permission, you have to have an enticement of some sort. This is essentially an advertisement. You see a billboard with a car. It looks really good. You look at the car, or you look at the billboard for a few seconds, and they say, hey, buy this car. It's really good. It'll make you better. Or take our miracle drug. See all these happy people? These people are all happy because they took our miracle drug. Or for more one-on-one, hey there, did it hurt when you fell from heaven? Cheesy pickup lines. All of that is done to hold someone's attention long enough to give your pitch. You see people handing out flyers. The really successful ones try to interact and gain the people's permission and then go in and say, by the way, will you, attend our event or sign our petition or support this candidate. The less successful ones just hand out the flyers. So, got to get the person's permission. You do that through an enticement of some sort, and that's going to be very culturally and socioeconomically dependent. How you entice someone to listen to you, to interact with you, is going to be different depending on which country you're in, where they are in the social stratus, and what sex they are. Now, once you've got their attention, then you can go into the pitch. And it's no different whether you're trying to talk one-on-one with someone or you're trying to teach a classroom. If no one's paying attention to you, your message is not going to be received. If you want to be good at this, you got to prepare. For exercises, if you have an SOP, even if you're not that good at it, if you have an SOP, you're much more likely to get a good check mark than if you wing it. So in order to do that, you've got to create an SOP. You've got to figure out what's the objective for this discussion, this meeting that we're having. What do you want? Obviously, you've got to nest that in with the combatant commander's overall goals, but what is it you want from this meeting? What can you tolerate? If they say you can't come anywhere near our borders or anywhere near there, near land we control, and that's not acceptable, now you've got to work on how do you convince them to change their mind. If you walk in there and they say, hey, Americans are our greatest friends, and come on, everyone can stay here, we'll give you free gas, and here's some food, and stuff like that, okay, that works. But more than likely, you're going to have to work on some sort of reciprocal agreement with whoever you're talking to get the things that you need to support the combatant commander. And most importantly, when do you say nope and you walk away? You got to have that. A negotiation means that both parties can walk away. Otherwise, all you're doing is you're asking for something. If you can go to your boss and you can say, boss, I need a pay raise or I'm leaving the company, that's a negotiation. If you go to your boss and say, hey, boss, I'd really like a pay raise, but if you don't give it to me, I'm going to continue working. Now you're just begging for money. All right. Other things you need to know. Who is the other person? You got to know that because that's going to tailor your message and the audience. You might be dealing with someone who's amenable to the U.S. and the U.S. situations and the things that we need, but the audience is not. And that's going to be a problem. All right, and you've got to figure out how to go between those, which means you're going to have to do some research. You're going to have to know who the person is, who the audience is, not only culturally, but is it a mixed crowd or is it all guys or all women? What are their wants, needs, and desires? What are their cultural norms? Then you got to know other things like where's the event occurring? What security are you going to need? What are the ground rules? Do they argue the same way that people in the U.S. argue? Do they debate? Do they not debate? Will it be, a recitation of facts? Will you very slowly get into the discussion? And this is all very culturally dependent. So, thinking you can just walk in to a meeting unprepared is a good way to end up with less than optimal outcomes. Now, if you want to have rational discussion, you got two requirements. You got to speak the same language, and I don't mean the same actual language, but the same concepts, common understanding of the meaning of words. If they're speaking French and you're speaking English, that's okay. But if culturally the word lie means something different than what you think it means, you're going to have some issues. And you can discuss emotions or you can debate logic, but you're not going to get anywhere if one side is using emotion and the other side is only using logic. You're probably going to have to use a combination of the two, and you're going to have to know when to use it. Now, the other thing is the two parties basically have to be able to state what each other wants. If you come to me and you say, I need a new car, and I say back to you, here's a truck, that may or may not work. If on the other hand you say, I need a new car so that I can get to work on small roads, a big truck is not going to help you out. So you've got to actively listen and understand to be able to address what the other person is actually saying. And this is more than just, waiting your turn to speak. You have to listen and have your person taking notes to understand what is their position, what are their concerns, what do they want, and then you can formulate a way to help them achieve that meets the combatant commander's goals. All right, so if you want, there's a stock SOP for conduct civil engagement. It's 331-038-2102. You can find it. And ATP 3-55.4, techniques for information collection during operations. Appendix D and E, kind of helpful. But this SOP is a little limited, I think. Now, the 308th Brigade came up with some slightly different versions that, if you ask, probably be more than happy to share with you, and you can adjust to your AO or to your needs. So the 308th expanded the SOP for our use. And again, if you want a copy of this for your own needs that you're going to adjust for your AO or your situation, that's perfectly fine. Reach out to me, reach out to 308. More than happy to help you out. And so we, defined what civil engagement was: deliberate or spontaneous, between CA and non-military individuals or entities. It's directed at human perception, understanding will and behavior. Effective civil engagement is pre-planned, that while being conducted is interest-based, consistent, human relationship-focused, adaptive, credible, habitual, balanced, timely, and pragmatic. But again, you got to have the SOP. If you have the SOP and you're in an exercise, you're doing pretty good. If you have an SOP, you can violate your SOP. Just like doctrine, we violate doctrine all the time. But if you don't know the doctrine, how can you violate it? How are you anything more than just winging it? So come up with your SOP for this stuff. Follow it as best you can. Know when it's time to violate that SOP if necessary, or adjust it as necessary, and you will do better. All right, so you've got your meeting. Follow the SOP. Now, while you're working on this, prepping for your meeting, what are the inputs? What is your meeting engagement plan, and how is that going to work? Where's your cultural analysis? Make sure you have that. Do you have a record of prior meetings? Have you ever met with this person before? Then come up with your list. Expected outputs. What are your must-haves from this meeting? What are your, you'd like to have them? And most importantly, when do you know to walk away? Time, date, location of your next meeting. Do not finish up a meeting until you have the time, date, and location of the next one. And of course, when you're all done, type up your engagement report and conduct rehearsals. Civilian encounters are like public speaking. Very few people are great at public speaking to start with, but almost everyone can learn to be good at public speaking with time and practice. You conduct rehearsals for civilian engagement so that you can plan for the unexpected, so that you have actions on the objective, so that you have outputs, you have inputs, you know what to expect. And then when you get there, you are well prepared and you have a good meeting. You need to know the speaker, who you're talking to, and their audience. You may know this before the meeting. You may have to be able to quickly suss out whether they're persuadable or non-persuadable, because that will dictate how long the meeting goes and how much effort you put into it, and whether or not you can get anything back from it. Now, on the persuadable category, you basically have the indifferent. Those are people who think the information is of little use, but they'll listen to you. And with a lot of effort, you might be able to get them over to your point. And you have the ignorant, not used as a pejorative, but just they don't know the information. They're ill-informed, but they're receptive. Those are people you can work with. Then you have the non-persuadables. And, you have trolls, mostly on the internet, but you will have in real life people who are trying to disrupt the meeting, who are trying to cause an emotional reaction, people who are trying to sabotage what you're doing. You've got to watch out for them. Think of them like a heckler at a comedy show. They're not there to make the things funnier. They're just there to disrupt the show. Same thing. You're talking to someone and you've got someone in the back busy trying to relitigate history or throw out red herrings. Basically, it's a kind of power play. Then you have the conspiracy theorists. And you have those all over the world. And those are people, the non-falsifiable is always the answer. The reason why, X, Y, or Z is going on is obviously because giant conspiracy plot. And if you don't agree with me, obviously you're part of the plot. Lastly, and most difficult to deal with, are the bad faith. And those are people who have no intention of reaching or honoring any agreement. Or even worse, the issue is not the issue. We'll get to those people in a moment. They're very difficult to deal with. Almost always they're going to fall right into your walkaway category, and it's going to take a lot of effort for minimal return. But you got to know these different, broad categories and where people fall into them and what impact they're going to have overall in your AO. You need to know the culture you're dealing with. By and large, you have shame-based cultures and guilt-based cultures. Now, shame is when you think you are bad and the individual's value is based on the perception of select others. It's externally referenced. So if everyone says I'm bad, I must be bad. And usually that's based on observed actions. An example of this is I was in Afghanistan and the person I was discussing lied to me about an event right in front of my face, in front of a room full of other people. I knew he lied. He knew he lied. But what I could not do was say, dude, you just lied to me. Because at that point, I have brought shame to him. I've made an accusation. And the only way he can get rid of that accusation is resort to violence. So I had to swallow it. Now, shame-based cultures are more prevalent in tribal and Far Eastern cultures. There's far greater levels of social anxiety. Calling him a liar would put him in a precarious position, and the only way he could get rid of that, whether true or not, the only way he could get rid of the accusation, because it was the accusation that mattered, not the truth of the matter, was to get rid of me or some action to prove that I was in fact incorrect. So concern over one's perceived place in the community, that's what social anxiety is. More sensitive to social status, both threats and security. There's a fear of group rejection, and oftentimes there's a honor system. And they may argue more often from feelings, as feelings are never wrong. To juxtapose, the guilt-based culture is more individualistic. So guilt is, I did something bad. It's based on an action and an internal assessment. The action lowers my self-worth, and my internal assessment is I'm not as good of a person as I could be based on what I did. Now, guilt-based cultures are usually European or European influenced. They are less collectivistic. Individual mores are regulatory. There's tighter regulation and definition of right versus wrong. So people in a guilt-based culture usually are less willing to sacrifice their concept of right and wrong for the group than a shame-based culture. Something you need to know when dealing with various people in various places. You also have to be able to recognize and work around best you can bad faith debaters. Two of them rest on logical fallacies, and one of them is just malevolent. Appeal to the stone is a logical fallacy which dismisses the argument as untrue or absurd. You're not debating the information, you just say it's flat out wrong. For instance, if I said, I swam my horses across the river, person using appeal to the stone say, horses swim? That's just stupid. Horses don't swim. You're not going to get very far with that person. Then you have the invincible ignorance fallacy, and that's a fallacy of circularity. The person just refuses to believe the argument and ignores any evidence. You could show them a picture of horses swimming across a river, and they say, well, that picture could be faked. You're not going to get anywhere with that person because no matter what evidence you present, they're going to keep moving the goalposts further and further back. The last one is malevolent, and that's where someone hides what they're attempting to do under an argument that may or may not appear to be slightly more noble. And just to pick a random example, Someone says, who cares if climate change is real? We must have these laws to ensure justice and equity. So is that person arguing that we need to address climate change? And if so, you're not going to get very far. Are they arguing that we need better justice and equity? If you do that, you're still not going to get any further. Because really what the person's talking about is amassing the power required to be the judge of what is justice and equity. So if you run into any of these, set up time for the next meeting with someone else, hopefully, and walk away, because you're unlikely to ever come to an agreement. The appeal to the stone and the invincible ignorance fallacy, those people are just, they're not going to come to an agreement. And the person hiding what issue they're actually trying to get to, they're just malevolent. De-escalation. If there's a cop in your unit, and I mean state, federal, local, all of them have training on de-escalation. Have them set up an impromptu class and then practice it. Because sooner or later, just like what happened to me, you're going to be in a room where someone's going to pull a gun, and if you can't talk your way out of it, it's going to be a bad day. So to de-escalate, you've got to remove the emotion from the room. Speak slowly and calmly with a neutral but not robotic tone. Stay positive and focused on the other person. Avoid I or no especially. You want to engage in active listening. What are they upset about? Why are they upset? Okay. Repeat that comment back to them. Add in easy to answer open-ended questions. All right. Talking is much better than fists or bullets flying. Remember, if your tone is robotic, some can see this as a build-up to violence. And then you're adding emotion back into the situation. You've got to present very relaxed body language. Tilting your head, nodding while they're speaking shows that you're engaged and you're listening. You don't want to interrupt or shrug or point or fidget. Stay focused on the person who is talking. Avoid long responses or lectures. Make a connection and be empathetic with people. Be respectful. And remember, how you show respect is very culturally dependent. And help them solve the problem so you can either get back to a discussion or you can get out of there without any bullet holes. There are a lot of barriers that come up when two people discuss things because no one ever wants to be seen as the loser. You have logical fallacies and error in reasoning. You have bias. I don't like you because you're American or you're a guy or you're, whatever. There's a bias there. Blame avoidance. Politicians do this a lot, but other people, especially in shame cultures, is where they try to avoid or minimize or transfer culpability for a perceived public wrong or issue. Personal investment. A lot of times people are personally invested in how things are and how they stack up, to include their reasoning for why things are the way they are. They're personally invested in it. It's difficult to shift to that. Status quo. Change is scary. A lot of times, even if it's not very good, keeping the status quo is less scary than change. Logical fallacies. Not expecting anyone to become a great debater, but if you know what logical fallacies are, you can know how to avoid them or counter them or use them yourself. So you've got projection bias. A lot of people fall into this one. And that's where you think everyone everywhere throughout history has the same exact values as me. It's also called presentism. The present and all the values of the present, people back then should have had those values too. And people over there should have had those values. Now you have an appeal to the masses. This is where you say something like, hey, 70% think the Red Sox are the best baseball team. And if you disagree, you're a bad person. Well, 70% can think that. That doesn't mean the Red Sox are the best, even though they are. Tone policing. You'll find this happens quite often. And that's where you judge the validity of an argument by its emotional tone of delivery. Often it's a deflection. Don't yell. Don't get all emotional on me. You have to quote, you do it too. Our sins are much smaller than their sins or your sins. You got begging the question, why would anyone choose to be a bank robber? You're not defending and you're not even attacking. You're just begging the question, trying to create doubt in the position. Get the false dichotomy. Either this person's lying or you are. Well, no, someone could be just mistaken. Guilt by association, very commonly used. And that's where, hey, an American 30 years ago did something bad. You're an American, therefore you must be bad too. Or you read books. You know who else read books? You got the perfection fallacy. And that's where a person or organization has to be perfect in all ways throughout history, as defined by me, or they're evil incarnate. Tossed in with logical fallacies, you've got bias, blame avoidance. You've got proportionality bias. That's the inclination to believe that big events must have a big cause. Or the illusory pattern. You see casual relations where there may not be one. And remember, randomness is more threatening than having an enemy. If you say, hey, this group hates me, and that's why all these bad things happen, that is easy to deal with. You have a focus. If you say, wow, these bad things happen and I don't know why, that's much more destabilizing. And lastly, of course, conspiracy theories feed the ego. Believers are special and unique because they possess secret knowledge. Then you have personal investment in a belief system. You have anxiety deflection. It's a way to shift general anxiety to specific groups or causes. I don't have enough money to make it through summer. It must be because of those bad people over there. Then you also have the pleasure of victimhood. It's not my fault. Yeah, I spent all the money at the casino, but really it's those bad people over there who took advantage of me, and that's why I don't have enough money for the summer. And if you ever see the movie Repo Man, you'll see this played out. Guy's dying, the lights are growing dim, I know a life of crime led me to this sorry fate, and yet I blame society. Society made me what I am. Not my fault that I was robbing a liquor store. Society made me do it. Something else you've got to realize, status quo is comfortable and usually fairly stable. So sometimes you have difficulty getting past that to get a new agreement because that upsets the status quo. And you have selective exposure. People prefer information which confirms their pre-existing attitudes. You have confirmation bias. It's more persuasive. It's consistent with what you believe. Desirability. People accept information which pleases them. So having all of that, you're now ready for negotiation. And all interaction is a negotiation. You are attempting to gain someone's permission, their interest, and then make your pitch. And the purpose of a negotiation is to settle a dispute without fighting. It's a way of making a joint decision when those who are making decisions hold different views. So basically getting party A and party B to work together. And it's a way of achieving your own objective despite the other participants having different objectives. So remember, a good deal usually beats an okay deal, which beats no deal, which beats a bad deal. The other thing you've got to know is this going to be a repeated negotiation or a one-time thing? Because that will adjust your strategy. Used car salesmen often will use lots of tactics on people buying a car that they would never use if they were trying to work out what to have for dinner. And the reason for that is because they're going to have dinner pretty much every single night. But they're only going to sell you one car and probably never see you again. So keep that in mind, that if it's a one-time thing, people will act very differently than if they're going to see you in another week or 2 weeks. Now, when it comes to negotiations, there's lots of tips out there. Some big ones I've noticed is listen. Not just hear what they say, listen. Make sure you're taking notes. You're actually able to state their positions back to them. Shift focus as needed. If someone's trying to relitigate history, someone's trying to bring up red herrings or other logical fallacies, you need to be able to adjust and shift focus back to the situation at hand. The big one is a lot of patience. And again, you're going to get that by having a lot of negotiations. Practice. Don't take things personally as best you can. If you want to be good at negotiations, you got to know what you're walking into before you walk into the arena. You got to be willing to walk away and build the relationship as well as the deal. You can always come back if you have a good relationship with the person and discuss an issue again. If you burn the relationship, it doesn't matter how good the deal is, they may not honor it. Or, in the event you got to go back a second time, they may not be receptive to even talking to you or working with you. Debates. Now, that's not something we do in civil affairs, but if you know how debates work, it's going to pay dividends. So debate skills assist with negotiations, discussions, help you avoid arguments. It'll help you know the logical fallacies, how to spot them, counter them, and the best time to use them. Now, old-timey people used to study in college the trivium, which was grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And if you take a look at grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and learn how to use them and when to exploit them for maximum impact, you will be much better at meetings and negotiations and discussions. Hope you enjoyed that. As always, a book recommendation. Coup d'etat by Edward Lutbrook. Written a long time ago, updated about 1980, but still very relevant. And the reason is, it's a battle plan. If you know how coups are conducted, you know how to counter them, or at least how to help counter them. And since there's been about 137 coups since 1945, it's fairly dang common that one's going on somewhere. And odds are we're going to be called in at some point to help either before, during, or after. If you know what the enemy's going to do, you know how to mitigate it or prevent it. As always, if you have any questions or you disagree, feel free. Have some evidence behind it, but feel free to disagree. And leave your comments below or just send me an email directly.